Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I want to talk about our new Moonstar Crab Talismans and also just talk a little bit about the moon. Let's start with the talismans. You know, moon talismans are really hard to elect. The moon's really fast, she's zipping through the sky, and it's really hard to get everything lined up. So, our normal planetary talisman, we want to have the planet dignified. In this case, we've got the moon dignified very powerfully. She's unusually strong in this talisman. She's dignified by both exaltation and triplicity for an overall +7 essential dignity score. The moon's also culminating, which means she's conjunct the midheaven. It's a very powerful placement. Also, it's moon hour, and as a bonus, it's even moon day. Not very hard to get these going. So, and the additional thing with the moon is that since this is a moon talisman, and we're very focused on the moon, I do also look at them, making sure the moon is waxing. So in this case, the moon is also waxing. So, again, pretty amazing talismans. These are actually our most powerful moon talisman that we have now. Almost the maximum strength possible. There's a few, I think you can get +8, which is like almost impossible to get. And then I think you could potentially have it rising, which would be a little tiny bit stronger. But basically, we're up in that 95th percentile of the maximum strength possible for a moon talisman. It would, like I said, very hard to get all these factors lined up. Definitely worth having. If you're looking at this video much after February 2023, when I'm making the video, there's a good chance they're going to be sold out. These are a limited edition. All of our talismans are limited edition. This is a brand new design that we haven't done before, and I expect that these will be very popular. The Renaissance mage Cornelius Agrippa, he says that moon talismans, says he make them grateful, amiable, pleasant, cheerful, honored, removing all malice and ill will, causes security in a journey, increases riches, causes the health of the body, drives away enemies and evil things from what place thou pleasest. So in other words, this is a health, safety and protection, growth, and in particular we've optimized them for increase of wealth. So great stuff. I wanted to get a little deeper into the moon though. It's interesting because the sun and the moon are what are called the luminaries. They're the lights. So the sun is the light of the day and the moon is the light of the night. And the sun is really obvious. I mean, it makes everything obvious. I mean, and the effects of the sun are pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty clear what the sun is, but the moon is very mysterious. Not only if you think of night, like if you go out in a full moon, there's light, but it's still, not super easy to see things. They're illuminated, but they're not fully brought into consciousness. I think that really reflects a lot of what the moon does and why she's so mysterious. So I want to talk a little bit start off with planetary rulership. I was going to talk about the moon's planetary rulership, and then I realized I really need to talk a little bit about what planetary rulership is. This is a subject that people tend to get into big arguments about. They'll be like, oh, this is ruled by this planet. No, this is ruled by that planet. And they argue a lot about it, and they think that there's only one ruler of things, and they also think that there's a right answer. When in fact, what we're dealing with is a situation where everything in the material world contains all 7 planets in varying levels. And so what you consider the rulership to be is really going to be a matter of opinion and preference in a lot of cases, because every single planet is in every single thing. What you're doing though when you're talking about rulership is you're focusing on a certain factor or a certain quality of the thing, and then you're looking for the planet or planets that reflect that. So for example, we'd often say that roses are ruled by Venus, but that's because we're focusing on how beautiful they are and how sweet smelling they are, which are clearly Venusian qualities. But the thorns are ruled by Mars, the sap by Mercury, the roots by Saturn, and so on through all the planets. So they're all there. Another thing to think about is gold. Now, again, gold is ruled by the sun in terms of the color and the temperateness of it. The temperateness is ruled by Jupiter and the value as well, and then the heaviness by Saturn. So you've got a lot of different qualities sort of packed in there. All the different planets are involved with it. So as we're looking through this planetary rulership stuff, recognize that there's not one right answer, and that there can be multiple planets that rule things, even if we're talking about a particular quality. And certainly when we're looking at the thing as a whole, as I said, every single planet is involved with it. So let's just look a little bit at the rulership of the moon. And another thing I'd say about it is I'm going to have links there to my planet page, and you can take a look at these lists. And for each planet, there's many, many different things that are ruled by the planet. You've got weather, winds, places, minerals, gems, people, plants, herbs, animals. Again, everything you can think of in the material world is ruled by a planet, or like I said, ruled by multiple planets. And I have multiple listings there. We've got probably the one I use most canonically that I probably follow the most would be Lilly. This is from his Christian Astrology, published in 1647. This is a Renaissance English source. There's also Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, which is a 16th century source. And then we have al-Biruni, who's an Arabic astrologer. That's an earlier, I think we're looking at about a 10th, 11th century source in that case. Al-Biruni can be a little funky, so if there's a kind of an argument between them, I would tend to go with Lilly, but nevertheless, recognize that all of them have the point that they're making, and you want to see the underlying logic of what they're looking for as opposed to arguing about which one's correct. So, for example, if we look at people that are ruled by the moon, Lilly lists queens, countesses, ladies, so it says all manner of women. So again, because the moon is feminine, it's, in our system is considered to be rules women in particular. Also the common people. That's interesting. That's used a lot in mundane astrology. If you're looking at a chart, the solar ingress chart for the year, for the country, and you want to look at the state of the common people, then you would look at the moon. Travelers, pilgrims, okay, that's because the moon moves so quickly. She rules, traveling. Also messengers. It says letter carriers, coachmen. So again, people moving around, people in motion, because the moon is the fastest planet. She rules action and movement. Sailors and fishermen, fishmongers, brewers, vintners. These are all people that deal with water and fish and things like that. So you can start to see little strands of things that are ruled by the moon. Again, she's ruling women, ruling water, ruling movement. So things that relate to that are again ruled by the moon. Then we can look at herbs and plants. Lilly starts off by saying, it says, those herbs which are subject to the moon are soft and thick, juicy leaves, are waterish or sweetish taste, and they grow in watery places and grow quickly. So again, these are all, anything that sort of fits that parameters is going to be ruled by the moon. He says cabbage, melon, gourd, onions, mandrakes, poppy, lettuce, linden trees, mushrooms. And these are all things that are sort of white or watery, fit under the moon. Then he talks about places. He says fields, fountains, baths, harbors, desert places, port towns, rivers, fish ponds, standing pools, boggy places, common shores, little brooks, springs. The desert places is kind of interesting. I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. Everything else sort of goes with water, fish, rivers, streams, things like that. Metals, silver, stones. He says selenite, or selenite obviously is moonstone. Soft stones, crystals. So again, you can kind of get a sense of the various things and how that plays out in the rulership. I think though, if we want to really penetrate into the rulership, again, what are we really dealing with here when we're talking about rulership? In the Hermetic system, which is essentially what we're using for this medieval and Renaissance astrology, we always begin with the one. And the one is above all things, creates, shapes, and contains all things. Not ever separate from them. I mean, this is one of those things that's sort of like, you've got this big dude, God, on the clouds with the thunderbolts, and he made everything physically or something. The one is not a thing. It is everything together and beyond even that. It's the underlying patterning of all things, the underlying archetypes of all things, and it's everything as it still exists now. I mean, there's not a separation between us and the one or anything in the one. It's not like that they were made at some point and separated. They're always considered to be unified. So you have unity and multiplicity. And that's again, what the one is made of. So as we can sort of look at it though, we can sort of, conceptually talk about a separation, and that initial separation that ends up in the archetypes, the Platonic ideas, which are the perfect forms or relationships of things. If you think about it, for example, a triangle, you can mentally conceive of a triangle, and then if you try to draw it or create it, it's always going to be less perfect because it's in matter. But it originally comes from that triangle, and the underlying archetype of all triangles, again, is a Platonic idea or a form. Ficino talks about seed ideas. So again, these archetypes are manifesting as seed ideas as we talk about thoughts in the soul of the world, the anima mundi. And then this manifests through the celestial realm, through the planets and stars, then to material things. So again, this is not a rulership through, like I said, physically creating things, through beams, through rays, but through this archetypal relationships and pure forms, tendencies, natures. And again, they're never really separate. Everything that comes from the archetype, like I said, of triangles, is connected. And so we have this, for example, the Centiloquium attributed to Ptolemy talks about the celestial forms control the material forms. So for example, the Scorpio controls physical scorpions. And that's not, again, through some beams and rays, but because they are not separate. They're all the same. And the Scorpio is a much purer, higher archetypal form of it. So again, you affect that, and you're going to cause an effect in everything else that's connected to it, because they're really not separate from it. They're all connected. And again, the true connection is all through the one. Nothing is ever really separated. Everything is all still unified and together. So a very useful interface for this is this going into the celestial world, the intermediate world. And Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy talks about the material world, the celestial world, and the divine world. The divine world is where the archetypes are manifesting. Celestial world is the heavens, the stars, the planets, and all celestial factors. So that's a really interesting level to interface at, and that's what we do when we do astrological magic or deal with astrology for predictive purposes. And again, if you talk about the planets, there's external planets, the physical planet, which is sort of like the body of it, and the soul of it, the archetype is really what's most important. And that also manifests within us too. So when we do an external invocation, we're contacting an external spirit, so to speak, an external angel, but we're also manifesting the spirit of the moon or whatever planet we're dealing with inside of us as well. So if you want to get a better idea of these archetypes as they're manifesting in the celestial world, it's really useful to read the rulership list. Like I said, I've got links to that. Take a look at that. And you can kind of go either way. You can understand what the moon rules. Like I said, you can say the moon rules water and silver things, white things, women, common people, and things like that. Or you can go backwards. You can look at all the things that are listed as being under the moon and then understand about the moon from looking at those individual things. One example I had of that was when we lived in Washington, D.C., we lived in this apartment building very close to the National Zoo. And it was completely enclosed with a big courtyard, grass and trees and plants and everything, and this big fountain. And the mallard ducks that were attracted to the National Zoo that had duck ponds also were attracted to our fountain. And every year we would have a mother mallard duck come in and lay eggs in the courtyard and then lead her ducklings into the fountain. So we kind of jumped in and helped them out, just kind of helped them. We used to clean out the fountain. We used to, provide sort of supplemental food for them and things like that. And then eventually they leave. So we got a lot of opportunity to kind of observe these ducks and understand about them. And one thing that's interesting, the moon rules waterfowl, which makes sense. It's the watery. So the moon rules ducks. One thing that's very interesting about the ducks is that they weren't as smart individually as, say, a crow. But what was interesting about them was they learned as a group. And as soon as one duckling learned something, the others would immediately follow them and learn it as well. So they were actually pretty smart as a collective group, which again got me thinking about the moon. The moon, interestingly enough, one of the things that the moon rules are, let me just find this section here. It talks about the moon. It says the moon rules, this is Picatrix, high knowledge, magic, medicine, petition, and ancient things. This is Picatrix Book 3, Chapter 1. And then also the Picatrix says that the moon also rules thoroughly studying high sciences such as astrology, magic, and other secret sciences. So this kind of makes sense from the standpoint of being mysterious. But the moon also has something to do with, like I said, knowledge, wisdom, and studying these arts and things. And again, I got kind of a glimpse of that through the mallards. Like I said, they're actually very wise in a collective sense, which again makes sense. You talk about the common people working all together. So again, very useful way to kind of understand these nature, and then give us a very interesting perspective into what natural rulership is, and then this Hermetic view of reality, which is what we use as magicians. And there's no good going on about quantum physics or whatever if you're going to try to do magic, because it's a different system. If you want to really excel at astrological magic in a traditional sense, you need to understand very deeply these planetary rulerships and then these interconnections of all things. Because ultimately, the wise man and the magus are the ones who are able to trace these relationships and able to take advantage of them. So let me talk a little bit about two other functions of the moon. Like I said, the luminary, the light of the night. The moon is the ruler over then also the sublunary realm. If you think about in geocentric astronomy, which is what's used in traditional astrology, you've got 7 spheres, each of the planets. They're arranged in terms of the speed of the orbits. And then, so the Saturn is the farthest away and the moon is the closest to us. And then the sublunary realm, which is everything under the moon, is the material realm. And so that's the realm of creation, life, and death. And that's what the moon rules. And you can see that very clearly in the moon's 27.5 day cycle, the moon phases. As she waxes, like I said, you have the new moon where there's birth, waxing is growth, and then waning is, the end until death, so to speak, at the new moon again. And the other, so for purposes of astrology, again, I think people are very, aware of the waxing and waning moon, but it tends to be in a very unsubtle way, which is basically they say, well, waxing is good and waning is bad, and that's all it is to it. The first step from that is to say, okay, well, waxing is for increase. So if you astrologically want a time for something and we want it to increase, then you want it to on a waxing moon. And you can see that like with this talisman, we wanted to have a waxing moon, we want to have increase. With this particular one, this is a positive one, we'd have growth rather than decrease. On the other hand, there are plenty of circumstances where you want to have decrease. So if you're making a moon mansion talisman for getting rid of something, like the 18th mansion is for stomach problems, it would make sense to do it on a waning moon. Or for example, if you're going to do a protection talisman, a fixed star talisman, and again you want to get rid of negative influences, then also a waning moon would make sense for that as well. So again, it's not just good, bad, it's also what do I want to do, what do I want to accomplish. Picatrix even gets more complicated than that. It talks about, it says, so after the moon separates from the conjunction of the sun at new moon all the way to the first quarter, it's a good and harmonious time for buying and selling, for trials and asking for repayment of debts, debates and councils. It says after separating from the opposition of the sun, so that's going from full moon to the first quarter, that's into the waning moon, that's a good time to collect debts, for get things returned to you, and also for wisdom and asking and inquiring into truth. So you can see that this waxing and waning cycle, again, has much more complexity to it. And again, this very finely timed in terms of when you take these activities. So again, very interesting cycle, can be very useful in terms of folding this into the other predictions you do. And then the final thing I want to talk about is the moon's function as an intermediary. And Picatrix again says, draw your attention to the moon in all works of magic, as if it were the chief of all other planets, because it brings about evident manifestation and judgment, like I said, generation and corruption. And also, she is the mediatrix, in other words, the intermediary, in advance of your work, receiving the influences of the other stars and planets and pouring them out onto the everything here on the world. So the moon has this really unique function of acting as an intermediary. And that's important in this Hermetic view and understanding the nature of reality through the Hermetic approach, but also very important in an astrological sense because, for example, in fixed star talismans, the fixed stars, as I said, you've got the 7 planetary spheres. The 8th sphere above that is the fixed stars, and that's a long way away from us. So we use the moon to connect the fixed star to us. So every time we're doing a fixed star election, we're also using the moon because, again, she's connecting things. And it's also useful if we can do it in a talisman. It's not always possible. It's a nice bonus, say if we're doing a Jupiter talisman, to have the moon applying to a positive, like a sextile or trine or a conjunction of that planet, because again, that's going to bring that influence even more strongly to us. So very interesting. We just kind of scratched the surface of the importance of the moon. I could do hours and hours of talks about the moon. But again, I think it brings it home as how special the moon is and how important it is to work with the moon. And you can do this, like I said, with the talisman, this new moon star talisman, crab talisman is a great way to do that. We have many other moon talismans. You can check those out. Talismans or astrologically timed invocations are a very high intensity way, powerful way of interacting with the moon. Useful if the moon is unafflicted in your natal chart or it's dignified. So like, for example, if the moon is in Cancer or Taurus, or any other sign except Scorpio or Capricorn. That's her fall and her detriment. Or as long as she's not combust, then you're fine. If the moon's afflicted, then you might want to do a low intensity interaction with the moon and do something like the daily planetary practice or planetary charity. And you can see links to that. I'm going to include that on the YouTube page as well. So again, we're just sort of scratching the surface, getting a little bit of an introduction to the moon. I think the talismans are a great way to work with it if that's something that's compatible with your chart. But you can check out those other opportunities. And delve into the Renaissance Astrology website. Take a look at the planetary rulership lists. If you really get excited about it, you can take one of my courses and really get deeply into it. But like I said, you can see how rich a heritage and tradition we have to draw on in medieval Renaissance astrology. And again, one of the reasons that's for me it's so exciting to work with it. So again, happy to share that with you, and I look forward to doing more videos delving into these issues of both practical astrological and astrological magic, as well as the sort of theoretical and underpinnings of what's going on.